Okay, fantastic. So, thank you very much to everyone. So now you all know where the chat function is. This is going to be really helpful for housekeeping. Um, so today we're actually really lucky because we have Shane Desaram, who is a global leadership manager today. So thank you so much for joining us today. You might not be familiar with Fuse Universal, but Fuse is an integrated learning platform, and we work with customers including Vodafone, Scandic Hotels, Hilti, and Carpetright, helping them to create measurable business results by delivering learning, skills development and performance coaching to their employees and partners through our consumer grade technology. Today, we are overjoyed to be joined by Shane Desaram, a global leadership manager from IHG. And today he's going to talk to us about what was key to improving their learners' experiences, engagement and interaction. We're also going to cover a bit of housekeeping. So for those of you who haven't found it yet, you can ask a question anytime in the Q&A box below. I'll be checking it throughout the presentation, and at selected points we'll be able to answer the questions for you. So when something comes up, please put it in. It might leave your head, so put it in the box and I'll collect it, and we'll do it at designated times through the presentation. This webinar will be recorded as well, so please make sure when you're sending a question that you set the button to all panelists and attendees, because I'm definitely going to see it then, so that's great. And we'll be answering these questions throughout and have 10 minutes at the end for Q&A. Now, my name's Ilona Brannan. I'm a consultant here at Fuse Universal, so I have the great job of meeting clients and understanding their needs and aligning that to the product that we have. So I'm really excited to hear Shane's story today. So Shane, please, could you let us know how you did what you did?
Thank you for the introduction, Ilona. So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone, depending on where you're calling from. I don't know if I saw anybody from the Americas, but just in case. So we thought we'll kick off with a stakeholder map, just to set things in context in terms of how we operate the IHG General Manager Program. So a bit of background. So if you think about our business model, we operate all across the globe, across 3 big regions. In our context, we call it Greater China, EMEAA, and Americas. So if you can see my screen right now, which I hope you can, you should be able to look at our stakeholder map and understand the complexities involved in running a global program such as the IHG GM program. So we have 5,500 GMs all across the globe, and we are tasked with providing them with their onboarding and professional development opportunities. So we have the core project team in that light blue at the top left corner, but then you can see the plethora of other teams involved in managing this. So we rely heavily on our regional learning teams to deliver the content. We work very closely with global tech in understanding how Fuse fits into our learning ecosystem. Obviously, you have our key stakeholders, which is our general managers. And then we also rely very heavily on the regional support teams in acting as our first line of defense. So it's important to be able to distinguish where the lines are drawn in terms of support for administrative efforts, as well as the learning aspects of it. And obviously we work really closely with the Fuse team as well in identifying areas of opportunity to further develop our offering, as well as kind of aligning with other clients. And that's another great thing about this network that we've built, is that with Fuse, you're able to kind of tap into other clients' experiences and knowledge base to kind of enhance your own offering. So that's our stakeholder map, and I won't go into too much detail, but I'm going to jump into the next slide now to talk to you about where we've come from. And it's a really interesting story that goes back to about 2016. So we always knew that there were, well, when we defined our global learning strategy, we defined 2 priority audiences. One of them were our frontline colleagues, and the second audience that we defined back in 2014 was our general manager audience. So we knew that there was a need in supporting our general managers and getting them up to speed to run a profitable hotel, and also allow them to be an IHG brand manager. So what we've kind of came up with is this process, which you can see on the screen, which is providing hiring managers and owners with the right tools to hire the right profile of GM for the hotel, followed by a development pathway. So when we first created this, the development pathway was hosted on a single platform, like a web page. Think of it as a blank web page, not blank web page. Think of it as a web page with about 100 different links on it, bouncing people or GMs from one platform to another. So they would come in, see this pathway, it looked nice and structured, but when they would click on the link, it kept taking them away from the core learning. It took them away from the pathway. Now it served a purpose because it allowed us to kind of consolidate all that information into one page, but it wasn't truly learner-centric. Part of that process was also kind of consolidating everything they learned on their pathway at a learning event. So this was focused around action planning and consolidating everything that they've learned on the pathway. From that event, they would also come out with action plans, which is your ongoing learning piece. Again, this wasn't digitalized. It was simply, here are the 10 things that you guys need to do. And it works, don't get me wrong, but it wasn't truly learner-centric. Another piece of the puzzle that we kind of had to bring together was that, yes, we had an onboarding opportunity, which was the development pathway and bringing GMs up to speed in running a hotel at IHG, but we also had to cater to our existing GMs as well. So in 2014, there was an event called the Journey to Brand Manager. It was hosted in Las Vegas. It had about 3,500 GMs brought together under one roof to build on their professional development. It was an offline experience. Again, it wasn't truly scalable. And I think that's where it kind of hit us in terms of, we have a pretty robust structure, which is the selection guides. We have the onboarding experience. We have the event to consolidate the onboarding experience. And then we had this another event that was aimed at professional GMs who had been in the business for a significant amount of time. But how would we get this out the door to all of our regions? If you think about it, this was in Vegas, the professional development experience, and the other elements were kind of scattered across the board. So we went into RFP and we decided to kind of bring this all together via Fuse. So those three big elements are still retained as that fundamental or the foundations of what we built on. So if you think about it, we have the selection guide, which is critical in identifying the right profile of GM for the property and for the brand. Once that hiring process is complete, this is where Fuse kicks in and the whole GM program experience. We have brought to life this onboarding experience, which truly puts the learner at the center of the experience, still culminating in the onboarding learning event. But the new piece, and the first for IHG at the time, which was in 2016, was this professional development opportunity. We were able to create this holistic experience that truly allowed GMs to start off on the right foot at IHG, but also continue down the path of their professional development. We ran a competitor analysis last year in 2019, and it was clear, I won't call out the names, but when we did the analysis, it was clear that we were one of the only hospitality organizations to provide GMs with a consolidated professional development opportunity. And like I said, this was all brought together on Fuse. So as we go into the next slide, it's going to dig a bit deeper into the actual structure of it. You'll see that we have, and if you think about the stakeholder map at the beginning of the presentation, we rely heavily on our subject matter experts to create content for us, but we've created some very clear guiding principles to support that logic as well. So if you think about onboarding, and it's a 6-month experience, it was key for us to understand, what does a general manager really need to know in their first 6 months of their tenure at IHG? So with that lens, coupled with something that we call proficiency definitions, to understand that onboarding, what do they really need to know? And we dug a bit deeper by segmenting that by subject matter as well. So when you think about onboarding, we have subject matter that focuses on loyalty. We have subject matter that focuses on owner relations, asset management, financial management. And what we did was we structured it by timeframes. And what Fuse allowed us to do was actually deliver that content in a structured and consolidated manner. Now with professional development, what we've kind of done with Fuse is that we have structured the content to allow users to peruse it at their own leisure to some extent. So for example, if you think about onboarding is structured by timeframes to make them focused and understand this is exactly what you need to know in your first 6 months of being an IHG GM. And then professional development is all about ongoing development. How do we keep them engaged in content that they want to be engaged in? Now, everything I've spoken to you about right now is all focused in on formal learning to some extent. So what we wanted to do was kind of add a little bit of spice on top of this, right? So yes, it's great that we have all this learning being pushed out by IHG, and it is segmented really fluently in terms of onboarding and professional development. But how do we kind of build on that and really put the learner at the center of the experience? So there's 4 key parts to this. All underpinned by the 70-20-10 principle. And I won't talk to you about the 70-20-10 principle because I'm sure you all know about that. So it is a fundamental factor, though, in terms of how we define what experience we want to bring to life on Fuse. So again, that first piece, and it is critical, it is the learning plans, it is that formal content that's being pushed out. But what we did was, by applying the 70-20-10 principle to the content, yes, this is formal learning, but it's all about how do you actually put it into play? How do you make it actionable? So when you go into our content, you'll see that, yes, there's a video that you might have to watch, but it's underpinned by the fact that here's how you use it, and here's how you can bring your teams into this learning experience. Another big piece around why we chose Fuse for this was around the communities. So if you think about the development pathway that I called out in 2014, where it was hosted on a page with links bouncing people in and out, it was siloed, right? It kept putting the learner in a position where they were unable to leverage this network of experts, so these 5,500 GMs, all with their individual experiences and best practices that they wanted to share. So communities was a massive aspect for us in terms of how do we leverage the knowledge that's sitting at our doorstep and give them a channel to share that with other GMs and their peers. And that's done through communities. And that's a massive principle that we kind of continue to drive on Fuse. So we call it the community of best practice. Another big piece was around external learning. So again, the technology allowed us to have a more holistic view on learning experiences. Yes, we're learning professionals, so we're able to leverage subject matter experts in the business as well to support our cause as such. But there's also a lot of knowledge and information that needs to be brought to life on our internal platform from external sources. So again, another key piece for us, and we keep promoting this, is the industry newsfeed. It is a single widget, but it's a powerful widget because it allows learners to understand that this is not siloed learning. You have the communities to interact with peers, but you also have learning that's being brought to life on the platform from external sources. So it's another unique selling point for us from that perspective. And also, very briefly, the resources section. I think it's important to understand that there is, formal learning, there's social learning, there's external learning, but there's also it's additional learning. And again, it's an opportunity for us to tell GMs that, hey, once you've gone through as much as you can in terms of the formal and social piece, if you still want more, then there is more, and that's through the resource section. Yeah, okay, cool. I'm going to move on to the next slide and just kind of talk to you about some of the highlights from the program to date. So in terms of value and impact, now this is a challenge for most of us, I'm sure you've all kind of been through this, is finding that correlation between learning experiences and interventions and how it impacts the business. Now, over the last 3-4 years now that we've been with Fuse, we've been drumming beating this drum for quite a bit of time and looking for the data to tell us the stories. And we were able to pull out some really interesting insights. So if you can see my screen still, you should be able to see that first point around the positive correlation between learning that's being conducted on Fuse compared to and in comparison with our key hotel metrics, RGI, RevPAR, and guest love. And the second point about breakfast guest love is a really interesting one. I think it's a powerful one. So in 2017, it's an outdated case study, but it is still a case study nevertheless. We highlighted, or we found a need from the business to support one of our hotel metrics. And that was around breakfast guest love. So what the team did was they created 7 specific activities to target that metric. And when we ran the numbers, I think it was 3 to 4 months down the line, just to let it sink in a little bit, if a GM had completed 7 out of 7 breakfast guest love learning activities, there was a positive correlation on the impact of their breakfast guest love scores. So I think there's a lesson to be learned there, and something that we're still developing as well. So we're always evolving, we're always changing. So when we first created our learning experiences, it wasn't focused around our metrics, and that's a conversation, an ongoing conversation that we're having in terms of if we can identify the business need first, or the business issue, challenge that we're trying to address, and then develop the content to target that, there's a lesson that we can take away to say, yes, if we do that, we may see positive results. So that's something that we've taken away for the future. Also, I think, I mean, the last bullet point, it just goes to show that, with the right communication strategies, with the right content being uploaded, with the right messaging around social learning, there is a continuous appetite for the program, because the GMs do see the value and the benefits that can be derived from it. And again, that story is still developing, if I'm being completely honest. As you look across our global scale, there are certain regions that outperform others, and that is down to learner styles. And I think it's something that we can learn from those different business units, taking those stories and applying it to our other business units. Now, it is interesting that, as I was saying, we operate across the globe. So if you think about supporting the business, another big piece for us is acting as enablers. So I continue to tell our team that, we are not the experts as such. And that goes back to our stakeholder map, that we rely heavily on our colleagues to provide the right type of learning and inform us of where the needs are. So again, via Fuse, we've been able to create specific interventions for specific regions dependent on the need. So with Americas and an acquisition that we made a while ago, we were working on developing a Kimpton general manager experience based on the fact that they have specific learning needs for that audience. Now with Greater China, it's similar. We found that there was a need to support our Holiday Inn Express general managers in a learning intervention in ramping them up to getting the keys to the property. So this was an intervention prior to the GM actually entering the role. With Europe, again, we know as a business, it's important for us to support our hotels as they ramp up to opening. So with the Europe pre-opening team, we worked in line with their requirements to understand what does a Europe new hotel opening manager need. And we were able to bring that to life again on Fuse. And another big piece around our business is that we have GM learning events to support specific, again, requirements from the regions, and pre-work hosted to support the events were hosted on Fuse. So again, like I said, I think there's a big piece around supporting the business is that we act as enablers. And that is how we market ourselves. We contract with our stakeholders to understand what the needs are and support them with delivering it via the Fuse platform. And on Q1 2020 priorities, I think that's the last day for us in Q1, but we've been tackling a big piece around defining our engagement themes. As you all know, the world is in a bit of flux. There's a lot going on. So it's understanding, where do we draw the line? What do we communicate to our general managers? Now, this was not as intense as it sounds until COVID-19. Our themes were based on the business needs and the developmental needs of GMs. I think that focus has shifted slightly. And I think, again, via the technology, via this platform, via the program, we're able to kind of adapt according to what the business needs from us. And then a big piece that my colleagues working on at the moment is the behavioral aspects from a social learning perspective. So that's that second bullet point under Q1 2020 priorities. A big piece for us, like I said, in terms of the acquisition of Fuse for us, was around social learning, giving GMs a voice and a channel to communicate with them, with their peers. Alongside that comes, how do we alter or enhance the behavior on the platform to have a truly impactful experience to other GMs coming on the platform. So for example, when we first acquired Fuse, it was all about quantity. What did we want to get from a user gen experience? Quantity. We wanted people to upload content. We wanted them to add links, add videos, add articles, just do it. Go ahead and upload whatever you like around the general manager program, obviously. But that focus has shifted over the course of the last 4 years, and you learn from your experiences. So now the shift is now from quantity to quality, and that behavioral change is massive, and it's not to be underestimated. Something that I would tackle from the start, if I'm being completely honest, in terms of what type of behavior do you want to drive on the platform, because once you've instilled a behavior, it's quite hard to change it or shift it. And lastly, like I said, I think we've kind of touched on this already around our SMEs. It's absolutely critical for us to continue partnering with our stakeholders to create content that truly matters. And I can't emphasize that point more. It's leveraging the resources around you to truly bring this platform and your program to life. I will pause for breath, I think, there. And Ilona,
Yes, no, it's fantastic. Thank you for that. We do have some questions in, so I'll get the ball rolling with that. The first one is from Kristen, and it's, do you find the GMs use Fuse only as directed, or are they using it during downtimes or on their own devices in a time of need?
good question. So I would split that answer into two. So now, if you think about the program structure, we have two levels, onboarding and professional. Onboarding is a brand standard. It's a must do. You have to, you have no choice, which means 100% engagement. Professional level is not mandated. So we do see a little bit of a decline in terms of GMs possibly not seeing the value add of a professional development opportunity. And that's me being completely transparent in the answer. So what we try and do is on that professional level, because it's not mandated, we promote the fact that this is an opportunity. This is a value add for you to be part of a community that's bigger than just your hotel. This is about being part of the IHG GM family. So we do see a little bit of a drop off, but what we tend to focus our energy on now is adding or focusing our energy on those who want to be part of that professional development experience. So my response to that would be that it's important that your energy is not focused on how do you engage the masters. It's about how do you engage those who are truly engaged, or keeping them the engaged. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. And it sort of leads on to the next question, which was, it's quite relevant actually. Have you seen an increase in Fuse use engagement since the Corona pandemic hit?
Okay, another really interesting question. So we just pulled the statistics this morning. We are seeing in Greater China higher levels of engagement, given that they're just coming out of the peak of the crisis. But if you flip it and you look at Americas and EMEA is slightly difficult to make that judgment because we span all the way from Ireland all the way to Australia. So it's really hard to make that analysis. But if you look at Americas as an example, we are seeing a little bit of a drop off. And unfortunately, it's business circumstances, and it is what it is to some extent. But I think our energies are focused on how do we learn from China as they get out of this? What have they implemented? What are they doing so that we can support our regions as they start to see the light as well?
Yeah, no, and that's a really great example of how, it can help you right now with changing business circumstances as well, so that you can almost bring business as usual back faster because you'll learn from others. Yeah, that's really, really interesting. I have another question here for you. So this is from Ifaf, and can you please give us an example of an item in a learner intervention?
An item.
Yeah, an item. I think maybe it's like a piece of content,
Yeah.
that sort of thing. I think that's what you mean, Ifaf. Yes, exactly. Okay, great, thanks.
I think, is there any other questions aside from that, Ilana? Because I think that's a nice lead into the actual platform demo, because I think examples are so varied. And maybe that is the answer, actually. I guess the answer to that is that Fuse and the GM program, there's not one right way or wrong way of doing things. It's so open. We encourage all types of content, all types of items, videos, links, articles. It can be literally anything. I think the message I would share to this one, or the answer to this, is that content can be consumed in so many different ways, and people have different preferences. So it's important to have a variety, which is what you see on the GM program.
Do you find, that there's particular content that works well in a particular scenario?
Okay. So I would say yes. I would say you can define what content fits certain scenarios. It's really hard to make that correlation because it goes back to the fact that learners consume content in a different way. But if you think about trends, and if you look at our most engaged pieces of content, it's video based. It's short, bite-sized, video based content.
Right, that sort of bite-sized consumable learning. I've had another question just come in, and while we're on the topic, this is from Anonymous, but that is still a good question.
Mm-hmm.
Do you find content preferences differ by country and culture?
Okay, so I don't have the answer to that question. I'm happy to take that one away because I think that's good food for thought.
Yeah, I think so too.
If Mr. or Mrs. Anonymous or Miss Anonymous wanted to share their email address, happy to reach out.
Yeah, no, please let us know, and we'll do some investigating into that. That's it for questions for now. Remember, everyone, please put in your questions into the chat function. I'm keeping an eye on them, as you've just seen. So if you want to, desperately wanting to say something and share, that would be wonderful. I think it's a great time to show a bit of the demo.
Sounds good, Ilona. And if you could just let me know, just to confirm, if you can see my screen, the Fuse homepage, please.
I can. Can everyone raise their hand? Can you see it? Give me some hand raises, people. Wonderful, thank you. Yep, everyone can see it.
Thank you, Ilona.
Go through the demo now.
Perfect. And I think what we wanted to kind of showcase to you is the homepage and a little bit around that social learning. So I think what we wanted to focus on is how we use the tool to support our needs. So if we start from the top, I think that's the best idea. So if we look at the banner that's scrolling across, the purpose of the banner for us is to highlight content. So it's a featured area for us. It's highly customizable, which is really powerful tool for us so that we're able to target specific audiences. So for example, you'll see that there's 4 dots here, but it's not visible to every single audience. It's driven by their profile fields and how we determine what they see. Now it's really powerful in terms of highlighting content that we really want to draw attention to, like I said. So it's really interesting to see that a lot of our conversations are obviously around the coronavirus piece. But again, I mean, the little caveat with that is that we do need to vet the content and the comments as they come through. And that's a big lesson that we've learned over the course of the last 4 years, that it's great to provide a tool that allows for users to share their experiences and best practices. But it goes back to the original point that you need to be careful about what type of behavior you're trying to drive and what type of content you want users to be uploading. Now, I won't talk to you in too much depth about all the different aspects here, but I think one thing I would call out on the platform is that it is highly intuitive and simple to use. So for those who have eagle eyes, you would have noticed on the slide that these 2 widgets were actually down here when I first took that screenshot. But in the last couple of days, we're just running a quick Google Analytics test to see if we can get higher traffic as we move the widgets to the top. And it's interesting. I think it has had an effect, but I don't want to give you the data just yet because I haven't had full sight of it. But I think the point that I want to make on that one is that it's actually quite easy to use. And I think you can make those data-driven decisions as and when you need to with minimal tech expertise. Now, a big piece though around this is the social learning, right? So I think that's the one I really wanted to kind of dig into in terms of how we keep users engaged on the platform and keep their social activities alive and up and running. I think the 2 things that we wanted to kind of call out, and I'll start with the one on the right, is our engagement themes. And I mentioned to you as we looked at the Q1 2020 priorities, we were still defining what it looked like for the year. And if I'm being completely honest, we still are, because I think, given the circumstances around the business and the volatility of everything that's happening, we need to be careful about our messaging. So initially we went with the health and well-being piece, and it's important for GMs to understand that, hey, this is not just about formal learning and social learning. We will also be pushing out learning that's focused around you. And I think health and well-being, mental health and well-being fits well in the current climate. And I think it goes back to one of the questions that came up today. Like I said, the content is so varied. You'll have videos, you'll have articles that are kind of pulling through. Now, aside from the fact that it's the 10 piece, the video, you have the text to kind of form it. you have the activity to actually bring it to life. So it's got the 70 and the 10. I think that peer-to-peer interaction is absolutely critical as well. So it's delivering the right type of conversations that right type of content that spurs conversation. So when you're looking at delivering or designing content, it's important to put the learner at the middle of this experience. I keep going back to that point because it's absolutely important that, yes, again, as learning professionals, we know what's good and what's not good, but it's always good to put the lens on what does the learner really want from us? What do they need? And how do we actually bring that to life? And how do we keep the conversations going? And that's the featured content. We haven't, like I said, fleshed out the rest of the year, but it's important for us to ensure that there's a constant touch point with GMs, or there's that continuous drumbeat of content coming through, so that the platform is alive and it feels real. So it's not just, hey, here's a platform, go and do what you want to do. It's no, here's a platform that we as learning professionals at IHG, as the GM program team, need to take responsibility for managing and curating the right type of content and conversations. Another big piece is obviously around the user-generated content, and it's easy as using the same 3 links here, right? So the same links that we use as the IHG GM program team are the same links that the GMs use to post content. And we put no restrictions on this, right? So that's another big kind of call out there, that we trust our general managers to push out the right type of content. Now, the only time that we had to remove something was when somebody said to us that Hilton was their favorite hospitality organization. So we pulled that video. But apart from that, we tend to kind of, I think we pulled 3 pieces of content over the last 4 years, which is actually a massive success for us. But alongside that, there's also too much content that's coming through at the moment, which doesn't have enough context. So what we tried to do as an immediate step to support the work stream is to curate the best pieces of content that's coming through, and we call it posts of the week. So what we do is we go in weekly, we will go through every single piece of content and highlight the ones that we want to kind of showcase on the homepage. And then we'll do a push notification from the system to inform general managers that there's new posts that have been posted. So it's really interesting. Again, we had this really awesome general manager based out in Southeast Asia and Korea, and he simply posts a question around the coronavirus mask debate. So to wear or not to wear, that is the question, and please share why. Now, it's awesome to see the comments that are coming through. Now, I won't go through them all, and again, for GDPR, I'll probably scan through these quite quickly, but it's awesome. I think the biggest takeaway for this is that with Brian at the lead, he's taking the lead on this. He responds to every single comment that is being posted. And that's absolutely critical, that once a user or a learner has gone to the system, they've asked a question, someone's responded, someone needs to respond to that response, or the conversation dies. So it's a bit like Facebook. If I go in, or any kind of social media channel, if I go in and leave a comment for someone and I don't get a response, I would be put off, and I'll go to the next piece of content or the next article. So what Brian does is he keeps pulling them back, and we haven't trained him to do this. We haven't asked him to do this, but we will definitely showcase his content more often than not, because we know that we can rely on him to be that advocate for the program, for other general managers. And I guess there's also a point there around not every GM will want to voice their opinions, and there might be voyeurs of the content. They just want to consume it, and there's nothing wrong with that. I think what Fuse allows us to do is that it gives a voice for those who want to have a voice, and it allows those who want to stay in the background to consume the content and stay in that background and maybe use the comment section to voice their opinions if they want to. But again, it's not a requirement, right? So it goes back to the point that everybody learns differently, and everybody reacts differently to social learning as well. Cool. And I'm just going to go back to the homepage very briefly. I think we just wanted to quickly highlight a little bit more around some of the stuff that we've already touched on in that conversation. So we still have those formal learning plans, which sit in here. And again, it keeps things alive and real with the percentage bars. We spoke about the industry newsfeed. And again, this is something that's updated regularly. So it's not a one-time widget. It's a widget that allows you to continuously, well, we plug in the parameters and it automatically curates that content for us based on those parameters. And again, we just kind of brought to life a couple of widgets. These are literally drag and drop widgets that we use Fuse's design studio to kind of manipulate. So we just dragged and dropped them. Again, the thinking behind this, which is probably where I think it will add the most value in this conversation, is that we wanted to keep the platform alive, right? So again, it goes back to that point that we need a constant drumbeat of content coming through to showcase the fact that, yes, you may have completed all of your learning plans, but hey, there's still a lot of content that's still coming through that you might not have seen. And there's a lot of interactions happening on the platform that you can get involved with as well. So I think the piece there is around, hey, keep going with this ongoing development. It's not a one-time activity, it's ongoing. And I think the last piece of advice that I'll share before kind of wrapping up is that this is no mean feat, if I'm being completely honest. If you want to make the most out of the platform, it's important that you have the right resources behind it. So I would say, are probably running at about 70% efficiency. I think that 30% will take us to the next level, but that is because we need to have those additional resources to really bring the platform to life. Sorry. So for example, there are other tools that we're not fully utilizing, such as the good data dashboards that we can really use to make data-driven decisions. So the tools are out there, but I think if you really want to make a success of the platform, it's about how you allocate the right resources towards it as well. Because there's a lot that you can do with it. So it's up to you to kind of define what you want from it. And I'll pause there for a breath, Ilona.
No, that's really wonderful, Shane. And we've had some fantastic questions coming in already from everyone. Please put them in the chat box. I am looking at them. I've got them ready. So, wait for it. I'll say your name and read out your question. I think what would be wonderful now, actually, is if we have a look and see Lance. So Lance is with us today. Lance Bell, and he's from a company called Visualize That. And Visualize That is actually a live scribing of a session, so a webinar session like we've done today. So Lance, I'm going to ask, are you ready, or should I ask a few questions first? Either way, I'm okay.
I'm ready.
Yeah. Oh, you're ready. Fantastic. So Lance, can you please show us what you've been scribing from the chat so far? Fantastic. So we're seeing live here what Lance has been scribing. So we've got something to help you stimulate, your neurons, so that you think of new questions for us coming through. And I love this. This is so wonderful. Thank you so much, Lance. I'm going to start with, who's the lucky person? Who's going first? I'm going to start with Charlene. Charlene asks, I see the big advantage from social and peer group learning. Does this include somehow internal mentoring, reverse mentoring programs, or things like working out loud circles? And if yes, is there any functionality that supports the matching process? Shane?
So it's a good question. It's not something that we do at the moment, if I'm being completely honest, but it's something that we aspire to do, because we know that learning, if there's an intervention in place post Fuse, for example, we know that there's a lasting impact. So I guess, Ilona, I would pass the question back to you to understand if the capabilities there on the platform to leverage a mentoring aspect into this.
Yeah, so we do have one-to-one and coaching aspects, and there's also a really nice bit of functionality that my colleague Adam has told me about, which is where you can actually save items in a portfolio, and that can be really good for your own personal development and professional development, where you can actually put it in. So that's something for the platform there. Another question that I thought was quite good is Mads, what type of user-generated content do you see the most, and why do you think this is the case, Shane?
Okay, so that's a really good question. I think there's a long-winded answer, but I'll try and keep it as concise as possible. So if you think about when we launched 2016 with Fuse and the principles that we had around user-generated content, which was focused on quantity rather than quality, we implemented a leaderboard into this. So Fuse has the capability of having a customizable leaderboard. So you can allocate points for consumption of content, for the creation of content, and the interaction with content. So we tweaked the leaderboard to provide more points for content creation and content interaction rather than consumption. And I think the error that we made at the time was that we communicated this out to our general managers saying, hey, this is how you get points. So it started a trend of, like I said, adding content for the sake of adding it without context. So the easiest thing to upload on Fuse, I would say, is a link. So we see a lot of links coming through. Another easy one to upload is a image. So we see a lot of images of quotes coming through, for example. Now we've been able to kind of reverse that trend over the last year or so. My colleague has been working really hard on a work stream to change this. So what we start to see now is a few more questions, like you saw with Brian Harris coming up, in terms of creating that community of best practice, but it does need that instigator to start those types of conversations. So I guess in a nutshell, if I had to answer your question in one sentence, I would say the majority of our content is links and files, and that's supplemented by the true learnings that we tend to get out of questions and articles focused on best practices.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. And I love that you're using gamification to get people more engaged in making content, which is fantastic. I got a question from Kate Ashton, linked to content again. How many languages are you delivering, curating content in?
Another good question. So at IHG, we have something called hotel ready languages. But what we've identified for our general manager audience is there's 4 hotel ready languages, which I can't remember all 4. But what we do is we've identified 2 or 3 priority languages: English, Spanish, and Chinese. Because we know that most of our leaders predominantly speak in one of those 3 languages. And Fuse allows us to there's a few things. It allows us to translate the system into those languages, which is amazing. And the content delivery is also manageable through Fuse as well, so that learners can access the content in whichever language they need to.
That's really great, because then that's really, again, what you said about putting the user first and putting your learners' needs first when you're designing everything. And I imagine it really helps then for global delivery.
Indeed. I think it's absolutely critical. I think especially out in Greater China, Ilana, I think one of the big things is that, especially with the Holiday Inn Express GMs, for example, they will only speak Chinese. So it's really important as a global COE as such to provide the content in the relevant languages, which means we're putting the learner at the center of the experience.
Wonderful. Yeah, no, that's great. I've had another question come in. Thank you very much to everyone who has been putting in questions. They're flurrying in at this point. How does Fuse, or at what stage does Fuse help reinforce continuous professional development? And that's from Venus Wilson.
That's an interesting question. So I think, Ilana, please stop me at any point, but I think it's an interesting one that Fuse will stay with you on the journey right throughout, from start to end. So there are different touch points that probably Ilana can explain better than I can, but from my memory, they help with implementation, which is the design, the delivery mechanisms, and then the ongoing sustainment piece is also supported by Fuse. So we work with a lovely gentleman named Martin Nowak, who is our customer success manager. So in terms of the professional development piece, we rely heavily on Martin and their internal communication channels to understand what the new technologies that they're developing are, and ensuring that it's applicable to us before we actually go ahead and apply it. So there are the channels in place to support what we're doing. So it's just having that partnership and leveraging it to support your needs or meet your needs.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And we, it's things like this where we're sharing best practice with the community so we can all learn from each other, which is fantastic and so needed at this point. I have a question from Eva Maria. How do you structure the content aside from learning plans? I.e., how does the learner know that she is looking at onboarding content instead of further development content?
Ooh, that's another really good question. So I don't really have an answer to that. I think to that point, though, we only promote the content, the formal content as such, in the learning plans. And then we rely heavily on the search functionality to allow users to search content for themselves. And I think when we get to that point, we don't need them to know that as onboarding content or professional content. I think if there's a need for them to find it themselves, or if there's a need for them to find it themselves, I think that removes that factor of defining it as onboarding or professional because they've looked for it for a reason.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. And I know some other customers use communities within Fuse. So you can actually build groups so that people can actually learn from each other. And when you have communities, you'll be able to surface different content that's relevant for each of those communities. So you can either structure it globally or regionally or through different functions. So that's another option as well that we find is quite powerful for helping learners to kind of get to content that's relevant for them in their job roles. Thanks, Shane, for that. I also have, where's this question? Yes. Do you take extra steps or offer incentives to get your GMs to create content, or are you okay with user-generated content being optional?
It's a really good question, and that's a really good one as well. So I think there's a caveat with that. So yes, we did incentivize learners to upload content and reward them with our IHG rewards club points. But I think the caveat with that is that, again, we potentially drove the wrong type of behavior where we were focused on quantity rather than quality. So where we found it difficult to measure the quality factor of content. So I would say the answer is yes, we did. But if you have those same thoughts, it's very important that you set the parameters around it to say, we will reward you for the right type of content, not for the sake of uploading content.
And how did you know, like, how did you teach them of the right type of content?
Okay, so that's another good question that we're still working on. So our first, I guess there's two parts to this. The whole user experience or social learning experience is largely focused around commenting and user-generated content. I think they go hand in hand to some extent. So the first part of our project in terms of updating the user behavior was to change the behavior on the types of comments that were being posted on the platform. So between 2016 and I would say early 2019, most of the comments were, thanks for sharing, good content, thank you, great stuff, good morning, stuff like that. So there wasn't truly a conversation starter. So we had to kind of, divide and conquer, and we thought, what's the first thing that we need to kind of get right? So the first thing we needed to get right was the conversations, because the content, there were still diamonds here and there, but the comments were just in pretty bad shape, if I'm being completely honest. It wasn't a community of best practice because people were sharing comments, like I said, that didn't add value to the conversation. So we first targeted, how do we change the user behavior to get them out of this thanks for sharing mentality, and to really look at the content, consume it, and then reflect back and type those words into Fuse. So what we did was we added additional guides in terms of our expectations for what type of comments should be posted as such. And also we targeted, it's going to sound really harsh, but repeat offenders. So if one GM posted, thanks for sharing, like literally 100 times in a day, we would specifically send a message out saying, well, I think it's important to remember that we were very polite about it. So we targeted it with a bit of psych background saying, thank you for doing what you're doing. It's great that you're engaged on the platform. So we're reinforcing that message. But we also kind of underpin that with, now that you've kind of got to grips with how to engage on the platform, here's how you also kind of engage with it. It's not just thanks for sharing, it's the reflection piece and then coming back with some insightful comments. So the second piece around user gen, we're still working on it, if I'm being completely honest. So I think there are other Fuse clients who have nailed it, and we've been in touch with them and we've taken their best practices. I think we're just looking for the right time to share that messaging with our general managers.
Yeah, no, that's really great. And I think, using guides to help people understand how best to use the platform as a learning tool, not to consume, but actually to be active in that social element is really key. Because as you say, otherwise you'll just get like simple comments, and it's actually getting to that deeper learning. And then you can start to really see that change across your business because people are embedding the learning and then applying it more regularly. So yeah, I think that's fantastic, really insightful. Thank you for that. I've got another question here from Rohit, which is, how does Fuse the Fuse platform help learners or users to enhance their career path? And does this platform use any AI, BI element to showcase where the learner stands in his, her tenure?
Right. So I guess in terms of a career path, I don't think it's really applicable. Well, it's a tough question to answer, I think, given our context and the program that we run. So if you think about it, we only have that onboarding piece and the professional development, and it's a very specific user, right? So it's GMs only. So I think that question is a bit difficult to answer, but I do know that the capabilities are there. So this webinar was focused on the GM program, but on our same instance, we have another cohort, which is the future leaders. So it depends on how you use it. So I would say that the tools are there. It's just how you want to apply it. And sorry, Ilana, the second question again, and my apologies.
No, completely. It was pretty much two questions, I think, Rohit. So I think that's a great one to say that you can see people's learning pathways and stuff. And I think the other bit was any AI and BI element. I suppose that links to what you were saying about the news feeds, right? Because that's a bit of AI. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, sure. And I think, to your point, Ilana, I think there's tools and resources on the platform to make that come to life. So I think, Rohit, to answer your question, we on the front page have something called the user dashboard, which allows users to see their progress. And I think it's a really interesting one because it's not just the progress on learning plans. It gives them a social ranking as such. It gives them a nice kind of holistic picture of where they stand on Fuse. So there are tools that are available to support that type of thinking.
Fab, that's great. And I've got one from Ifaf here, which is, have you done a secret shopper survey to see what employees feel about these guides?
Yeah, it's another really good question. So I would say that we do annual surveys to gauge engagement levels and what we need to change. So I think to answer your question is yes, we do. And there's a constant drumbeat on that, because if we say that we're putting the learner at the center of the learning experience, it's really important for us to see them as a partner in what we create. So we will definitely be leveraging and continue to leverage our general manager's expertise as we go through the process of updating and refining our program experience. So it comes as surveys, it comes as interviews, focus groups, but yeah, we do, and I would encourage anybody thinking about how to leverage the platform to make sure that there is a clear line of communication with the learners to understand what the needs are, and using Fuse to adapt and mold your program to fit into that.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really great point. Always consider your learners first. Learner-centered design, right?
Mm-hmm.
Can we go back to your slides, please, Shane?
Sure, I think it just kind of popped out for a second. My apologies.
No, I think it was Lance had finished as well.
Oh, right. Awesome. Cool. Can you see it again?
Yes, I can. Everyone raise your hand. Can you see it? I don't want any bad omens on this. Thanks, everyone. Yep, we've got loads of hands. Thank you.
Perfect.
So yeah, I think that's it from me for all the questions that have come through, and they've been really insightful and interesting, and thank you so much for sharing, Shane. If you wanted to, yep, that's perfect. So this is, would you like to talk about this one?
Was that a question for me, Ilana?
Yeah, it was. I'm happy to.
Please go ahead.
Okay. Please join up. So first of all, I want to say a massive thank you to you, Shane. I've actually learned something today about how you've used Fuse, and it's been fantastic to kind of hear your lessons and what you've learned, and I can apply that to customers I'm going to be working with. So thank you so much for that. Really, really great. Our next webinar will be how do you choose the right learning system, and this is with the learning effect, and it's on Tuesday the 21st of April. So please come along. It's our next webinar. The link is actually in the chat box for you to sign up to right now while you're here. We've got 5 minutes of freedom to give back to you today. But yeah, please give a virtual round of applause, please, for Shane. He did such a fantastic job. Thank you so much, Shane. And thanks to everyone who was on the call.